A grieving father bought a crumbling mountain estate for $75,000 at a foreclosure auction, but when he arrived with his two young daughters, the entire town warned him to leave before sunset, and what he discovered behind the locked iron gates would prove they were right to be terrified. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, sliding under the door of Marcus Reed's cramped two-bedroom apartment, like it had been waiting for exactly this moment to change everything. He almost didn't see it. He was rushing around the tiny kitchen, burning toast, searching for Sophie's missing homework folder, and trying to convince 6-year-old Lily that cereal did not, in fact, taste better when eaten directly from the box with her hands. The chaos of single fatherhood had become his new normal, a relentless rhythm of exhaustion and improvisation that left no room for anything else. Certainly no room for grief, though it followed him everywhere like a shadow he couldn't shake. Marcus was 34 years old, though most days he felt twice that. His dark hair had started graying at the temples in the 18 months since Claire died, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent creases. He'd been an architect once, the kind who sketched buildings in notebooks during meetings and talked about sustainable design with the passion of someone who believed he could change the world one structure at a time. But that life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone whose wife hadn't wasted away in a hospice bed. Someone whose daughters didn't wake up crying for their mama in the middle of the night. These days, Marcus worked construction, 12-hour shifts hauling materials, hammering frames, doing whatever the foreman needed. It paid enough to cover rent, barely. The rest went to groceries, electric bills, and the mountain of medical debt that had accumulated during Claire's final months. Her life insurance had helped, but not enough. Nothing was ever enough. Sophie, 8 years old with her mother's green eyes and quiet intensity, had found the envelope first. She handed it to him without a word, already dressed in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd learned to be independent in ways no 8-year-old should have to be. Marcus took the envelope, noting the official seal, the embossed letterhead that read, Jefferson County Foreclosure Department. His stomach dropped. For a moment, he thought it was an eviction notice. But when he tore it open, standing there with Lily tugging at his jeans and asking for chocolate milk, he found something entirely different. A notice of public auction. A list of properties being sold to cover unpaid taxes and abandoned estates. He almost tossed it in the trash. Almost. But then he saw it halfway down the second page. Property 17. Ashford Manor, Ridgemont, Colorado. 6,200 square feet, 12 acres, mountain estate, historic registry. Starting bid, $75,000. Auction date, October 19th. Marcus stared at the listing. $75,000 for an estate that size, even run down, it should be worth 10 times that. He looked at the calendar hanging crooked on the kitchen wall. October 19th was in 3 days. That night, after the girls were asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, the screen casting blue light across his tired face. He searched for Ashford Manor and found almost nothing. A few historical records mentioning the Ashford family, real estate developers who made their fortune in the 1970s and 80s. A single grainy photograph from a 1983 newspaper article showing a massive stone mansion perched on a mountainside, elegant and imposing. Then he found the strange part. No recent listings, no sales records after 1987. It was as if the property had simply vanished from public record. The only mention he could find was a single line in a forum from 2009 where someone asked about the estate and received one reply. Don't bother, it's cursed. No one's lived there in decades. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Cursed. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in unpaid taxes and legal complications and properties that fell through bureaucratic cracks. Maybe this was one of those. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break he needed. A real home for his daughters. Space to breathe. Room for Sophie to have her own bedroom instead of sharing with Lily. A yard where they could play without him worrying about traffic or broken glass in the apartment complex parking lot. He looked at his bank account. Claire's life insurance had left him with $83,000 after paying off the worst of the medical bills. He'd been saving it, terrified to touch it, knowing it was all that stood between his family and complete financial collapse. But $75,000 for an estate. If it was even halfway livable, he could sell it for enough to pay off everything and start over. And if it wasn't, well, he'd been fixing things his whole life. Marcus registered for the auction the next morning. The drive to Ridgemont took 4 hours, winding through mountain roads that climbed higher and higher until the air grew thin and cold. Marcus had packed the girls into his beat-up Honda Civic, the one with the cracked windshield and the check engine light that had been on for 6 months. Sophie sat in the back with her nose in a book, silent as always. Lily pressed her face against the window, pointing at every deer and asking questions Marcus only half heard. The auction was held in a small county building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. Gided metal chairs faced a makeshift podium where a tired-looking man in a brown suit shuffled papers. Maybe 20 people filled the room, most of them older, locals by the look of their worn boots and weathered faces. Marcus signed in, received a bidding number, and sat in the back row with Lily on his lap and Sophie beside him, still reading. Properties came and went. A foreclosed ranch house went for $42,000. A commercial lot sold for $18,000. Then the auctioneer called Lot 17, Ashford Manor. The room went quiet. Not the normal quiet between bids, but something heavier, thicker. Marcus felt it immediately, the way the air seemed to shift. Several people turned to look at him, though he hadn't moved. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Ashford Manor, he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. 6,200 square feet, 12 acres, historic stone construction. Property has been vacant since 1987. Sold as is, no inspection, no warranty. Starting bid $75,000. Silence. Marcus waited for someone to bid. No one moved. The auctioneer scanned the room. 75,000, do I hear 75? More silence. Marcus felt Sophie shift beside him. He raised his paddle. 75,000 to bidder 212, the auctioneer said quickly, almost relieved. Do I hear 80? Nothing. The seconds stretched. Marcus's heart pounded. This couldn't be right. A property like that, even abandoned, should have attracted multiple bidders. Going once at 75,000, the auctioneer paused. Going twice. Another pause, longer this time. Sold to bidder 212 for $75,000. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that made Lily jump. And just like that, Marcus Reed owned a mountain estate he'd never seen. He signed the papers in a small office that smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, processed his payment with mechanical efficiency. But when she handed him the deed and the keys, she held his hand for a moment too long. "You have children?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded, gesturing to Sophie and Lily waiting by the door. The woman's expression tightened. "There's still time to back out. Properties can be difficult, especially that one." "Difficult how?" Marcus asked. She released his hand and stepped back. "Just take care of your girls, that's all." The drive up to the estate took another 40 minutes, following directions the clerk had reluctantly provided. The road narrowed as it climbed, pavement giving way to gravel, then dirt. Pine trees pressed in from both sides, thick and dark even in the afternoon sun. They passed through what must have been Ridgemont proper, though calling it a town felt generous. A gas station, a diner, a post office, maybe 30 houses scattered among the trees. Marcus stopped at the gas station to fill up and ask directions. The attendant, a young guy with greasy hair and a name tag that read Derek, gave him a strange look when Marcus mentioned Ashford Manor. "You bought that place?" Derek asked, the gas pump clicking to a stop. "Just won it at auction," Marcus said, trying to sound casual. Derek shook his head slowly. "That place has been empty for 37 years for a reason, man." "What reason?" "People say it's haunted. People say the Ashfords never really left. People say anyone who tries to live there ends up leaving in the middle of the night." He handed Marcus his receipt. "I'm just saying, maybe don't unpack everything right away." Sophie, who had gotten out to stretch her legs, was listening. Marcus saw the worry cross her face and forced a smile. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said firmly, for Sophie's benefit as much as Derek's. Derek shrugged. "Yeah, well, good luck anyway." The final stretch of road was the worst, steep and rutted, winding through trees so dense they blocked out the sky. Then suddenly the forest opened up, and there it was. Ashford Manor rose from the mountainside like something out of a Gothic novel, all dark stone and tall windows and sharp peaks silhouetted against the grey October sky. It was massive, far bigger than Marcus had imagined from the grainy photograph. 3 stories of heavy stone construction, with a wide front terrace, a circular driveway choked with weeds, and iron gates that hung open on rusted hinges. Marcus pulled through the gates and stopped in front of the main entrance. For a long moment, he just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring up at the house. It was beautiful in a haunting, forgotten way, beautiful and terrifying. "It looks like a castle," Lily whispered from the back seat. "It looks like it's going to fall down," Sophie said quietly. Marcus turned off the engine. "It looks like home." He wasn't sure he believed it, but he needed to. He needed this to be the answer he'd been searching for. The key was heavy in his hand, old brass with an ornate handle. He walked up the stone steps to the front door, the girls close behind him, and fitted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, far too smoothly for a door that hadn't been opened in decades. The door swung inward with a low creak, revealing a grand foyer that stole Marcus's breath. A chandelier hung from a vaulted ceiling, dusty but intact. A wide staircase curved upward to the second floor. The floor was marble, cracked in places but still elegant, and everywhere dust, thick layers of it coating every surface, hanging in the air, filling the silence with weight. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoed. Lily stayed close to Marcus, her small hand gripping his. Sophie walked ahead slowly, eyes scanning everything with that intense focus she got from Claire. "Daddy," Lily said softly. "Why doesn't it feel empty?" Marcus knew what she meant. The house felt occupied, not by people, but by presence, by time, by secrets that had settled into the walls and floors and waited patiently for someone to come asking questions. They explored the first floor together, a living room with furniture still covered by white sheets, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a kitchen that looked like it had been abandoned mid-meal, plates still in the sink, a calendar on the wall frozen on March 1987. The sight of that calendar made Marcus's skin prickle. Who left a house like this? And why? Upstairs they found 6 bedrooms, each one larger than Marcus's entire apartment. The master bedroom still had clothes in the closet, suits and dresses from another era. Sophie found a child's bedroom with toys on the shelves and books stacked beside a small bed. She picked up a stuffed rabbit, its fur matted with age. "Someone lived here," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "Someone had a whole life here." That night they slept in the master bedroom, all 3 of them together on a dusty mattress Marcus had stripped and covered with clean sheets from the car. He'd brought sleeping bags, basic supplies, enough to get them through a few days while he assessed what needed to be done. The house had electricity, surprisingly. The water ran brown at first, then clear. The heat worked, radiators clanking to life with groans and hisses. But Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay between his daughters, listening to the house settle around him. Every creak felt intentional. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like whispers. Around 2 in the morning he heard something that made him sit up. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere below. He grabbed his flashlight and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the girls. The hallway was pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt solid. He moved toward the stairs, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The footsteps had stopped. He stood at the top of the staircase listening. Nothing, just the house breathing around him. Then he saw it. On the foyer table below, a photograph that hadn't been there earlier. He was certain of it. They'd walked past that table a dozen times. He descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking under his weight. The photograph was in a silver frame, tarnished but elegant. He picked it up and his blood ran cold. It showed a family, a man, a woman, 2 young girls. They stood in front of this very house, the photo dated on the back, June 1986. But that wasn't what stopped Marcus's heart. It was the resemblance. The man in the photo could have been Marcus's older brother. Dark hair, same build, same serious expression. And the 2 girls, they looked enough like Sophie and Lily to be their cousins. Marcus set the frame down with shaking hands. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence. He turned to go back upstairs and froze. There, at the end of the hallway leading to the kitchen, a door stood ajar. He was certain, absolutely certain, it had been closed earlier. He'd checked every room, every door, every window before bringing the girls inside. He approached it slowly, flashlight raised. The door led to a narrow hallway he hadn't noticed before, tucked behind the kitchen. He followed it, heart pounding, and found himself facing a heavy wooden door at the end. Not just any door, a reinforced door with 3 separate deadbolts and a padlock. And fixed to it with old yellowed tape was a handwritten sign in faded ink. Do not open by order of Ashford Estate Trust. Marcus stood there for a long time, staring at that sign. Behind him, the house creaked and settled. Upstairs, one of his daughters coughed in her sleep. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. He reached out and tried the handle. Locked. All 3 deadbolts engaged, the padlock secured with a chain that looked industrial strength. Whatever was behind that door, someone had gone to great lengths to keep it sealed. And suddenly, Marcus understood why no one had bid on this house, why the town had warned him, why the clerk had looked at him with such pity. This wasn't just an abandoned estate. This was a vault, a tomb, a secret that had been locked away for 37 years, waiting for someone foolish enough or desperate enough to come looking. The next morning arrived cold and grey, the kind of mountain dawn that made the house feel even more isolated. Marcus woke to find Sophie already up, standing at the window of the master bedroom, staring out at the overgrown gardens and the forest beyond. She didn't turn when he approached, just kept watching the mist roll through the trees. "Did you hear them last night?" she asked quietly. Marcus's stomach tightened. "Hear what, sweetheart?" "The footsteps. They were downstairs." She finally looked at him, her green eyes too knowing for 8 years old. "Mama used to say old houses make noise, that it's just them settling. Is that what this is?" Marcus knelt beside her, putting his hand on her shoulder. "That's exactly what it is. Just the house settling. Nothing to worry about." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. Sophie had always been too smart to lie to, but lately Marcus found himself doing it anyway. Lying about how much money they had left. Lying about whether he was okay. Lying about whether moving to a crumbling mansion in the middle of nowhere was actually a good idea or just desperation wearing the mask of hope. They spent the morning exploring more of the house in daylight. It looked less ominous, with sun streaming through the tall windows, revealing details Marcus had missed in the dark. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Hand-carved moldings, original hardwood floors, stained glass windows that threw colored light across the walls. This house had been built by people with money and taste, people who intended it to last forever. In the library, Marcus found shelves filled with books, business journals, legal texts, volumes on real estate law and property development. Many of them had the name William Ashford written inside the front cover in neat, careful handwriting. Marcus pulled one down and flipped through it. Notes in the margins, pages marked, the reading material of someone serious about their work. Lily discovered the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with dead plants and overturned pots. She loved it immediately, declaring it her fairy garden and insisting they clean it first. Sophie found a study with a desk still covered in papers, as if someone had stood up mid-work and simply walked away. She collected the papers carefully, bringing them to Marcus like artifacts. They were invoices, contracts, letters, all dated from 1986 and early 1987. All related to property deals, land acquisitions, development projects across 3 counties. The Ashford family business, frozen in time. Marcus set them aside, not sure what to make of them yet. Around noon they heard a car coming up the drive. Marcus tensed, moving to the window. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up in front of the house, and a tall man in uniform stepped out, adjusting his hat. Marcus told the girls to stay inside and went out to meet him. The sheriff was in his late 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen enough to make them permanently cautious. His name tag read Thomas. He extended a hand, and Marcus shook it. "Marcus Reed?" the sheriff asked. "That's me. Heard you bought the Ashford place at auction yesterday. Wanted to come by and introduce myself, make sure you knew what you were getting into." Marcus crossed his arms. "Everyone keeps telling me I should leave. No one's telling me why." Thomas sighed, leaning against his cruiser. "This house has a history. The Ashford family, William and Margaret and their 2 daughters, they lived here from 1979 until March of 1987. Then one day they were just gone. Packed up and left in the middle of the night, according to the folks who saw them go. House has been empty ever since." "People leave houses all the time," Marcus said. "Not like this, not leaving everything behind, furniture, clothes, personal belongings. And not when federal investigators had been sniffing around asking questions about their business dealings." Thomas paused. The Ashfords were real estate developers, very successful. Too successful, some people thought. There were rumors of fraud, embezzlement, land grabs, nothing ever proven, but the investigation was serious. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened to them? The family. Official story is they died in a car accident 3 months after they left. Drove off a cliff in Wyoming, all 4 of them. Bodies were burned pretty bad, but dental records confirmed it. Thomas's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe the official story. After that, the estate went into a trust. No heirs, no claims, just sat here, taxes paid by some legal firm out of Denver. Until you. "So what's the problem?" Marcus asked. "They're gone. The house is legally mine. I checked the deed. Everything's in order." "I'm not saying it isn't legal," Thomas said carefully. "I'm saying other people have tried to claim this place over the years, bought it at auction, just like you. They never stay more than a few weeks. Say the house is wrong, that things happen here, things that can't be explained." "Like what?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't traffic in ghost stories, Mr. Reed, but I've been sheriff here for 23 years, and I've seen enough to know some places carry weight. This is one of them. All I'm saying is be careful. You've got kids to think about." Marcus glanced back at the house where he could see Sophie and Lily watching from an upstairs window. "I appreciate the concern, Sheriff, but we don't have anywhere else to go. This is it for us. We make it work here or we don't make it work at all." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. You need anything, any problems, you call me. I'm serious about that. This town might seem standoffish, but we look after people who need it. After the sheriff left, Marcus stood in the driveway for a while, looking up at Ashford Manor. The house stared back with dark windows like eyes that had seen too much. He thought about Claire, about how she would have loved this place despite its history. She'd always been drawn to broken things, always believed anything could be fixed with enough patience and care. She'd believed in him that way once, back when he was a struggling architecture student with more dreams than talent. I hope you're right, he whispered to her memory. I hope this is fixable. That afternoon, Marcus started making a list of repairs. The house needed work, but it was structurally sound. The roof had a few leaks, some windows needed replacing. The plumbing was old but functional. The electrical system was outdated but serviceable. Nothing he couldn't handle, given time and money. Money he didn't have, but he'd figure that out. He avoided the locked door in the back hallway, avoided thinking about it. There were enough immediate concerns without adding whatever mystery lay behind 3 deadbolts and a padlock to the list. But Sophie had noticed it. Of course she had. She noticed everything. "What's that door for?" she asked that evening as they ate dinner in the kitchen, canned soup heated on the old stove. "Storage, probably," Marcus said. "Why is it locked like that?" "To keep things safe, I guess." "Safe from what?" Marcus looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes in her face, and felt the lie stick in his throat. "I don't know, Soph, but we're not opening it until I figure out if the house is safe first, okay? There could be mold or structural damage or anything down there." She accepted this, returning to her soup. But Lily, who heard everything even when she seemed not to be listening, piped up. "I don't like that door. It feels mean." "Doors can't be mean," Sophie said. "That one can," Lily insisted. Marcus changed the subject, asking about what rooms they wanted for their bedrooms, what they thought of the house so far. The girls were resilient, adapting faster than he was. By bedtime, Lily had claimed the room with the conservatory view, and Sophie had chosen the one with built-in bookshelves. They fell asleep easily, exhausted from exploring. Marcus waited until he was sure they were down, then returned to the locked door. He stood in front of it with a toolbox, studying the padlock and deadbolts. Part of him knew he should leave it alone. The sheriff's warning echoed in his head, the clerk's worried expression, the gas station attendant's easy prediction that he wouldn't stay long. Everyone seemed to know something he didn't, but Marcus had spent 18 months having doors closed in his face. Doors to jobs he was overqualified for, doors to apartments he couldn't afford, doors to any kind of future that didn't involve drowning in debt and exhaustion. And here was one more door, locked and warning him away, and something in him just snapped. He pulled out his bolt cutters. The padlock was old, the metal worn. It took 3 tries, but it broke. The deadbolts came next, forced open with a pry bar. The screws were rusty, putting up a fight, but eventually they gave way. When the last one clicked free, Marcus stood back, breathing hard. The door itself was heavy, solid wood reinforced with metal. There was no handle, just a keyhole. He tried the brass key the clerk had given him. It didn't fit. Of course it didn't. He jimmied the lock with a screwdriver until something inside gave way with a crack, and the door swung inward an inch, releasing a breath of cold, stale air. Marcus pushed it open fully. Beyond was darkness and a staircase leading down, not the rough wooden stairs of a typical basement, but stone steps carefully constructed, descending into black. He grabbed his flashlight and started down. The temperature dropped with each step. The walls were stone, the construction professional, expensive. This wasn't a basement. This was a vault. The stairs ended at another door, this one unlocked. Marcus pushed through and found himself in a long corridor lined with filing cabinets on both sides. The beam of his flashlight swept across metal drawers labeled with dates and numbers, all meticulously organized. He pulled one open at random. Inside were files, property deeds, contracts, purchase agreements, all bearing the Ashford family name. Another cabinet held financial records, ledgers filled with neat columns of numbers. A third contained maps, detailed surveys of land parcels across multiple counties. Marcus moved deeper into the corridor. It opened into a larger room, and what he found there made him stop breathing. The room was set up like an office, preserved perfectly. A massive oak desk sat in the center, papers still spread across its surface. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and in the corner, a safe. No, not a safe, a vault. Industrial-sized, the kind banks used. The door was shut, but not locked. Marcus approached it slowly, his hands shaking now. He gripped the handle and pulled. The vault door swung open with a soft hiss, and his flashlight revealed what lay inside. Stacks of documents, boxes of files, but also other things. Stock certificates bundled and labeled, bonds in protective sleeves, gold certificates, even small bars of actual gold. And art, paintings and sculptures carefully wrapped and stored. On a shelf sat several leather-bound journals. Marcus pulled one down, opened it to the first page. The handwriting was the same he'd seen in the books upstairs. William Ashford, January 1986. Marcus flipped through pages filled with notes, observations, plans, business strategies, property acquisitions, financial projections. And then, toward the end, something different. Entries that grew increasingly paranoid, increasingly desperate. February 10th. They're asking questions I can't answer. Margaret is scared. The girls don't understand why men in suits keep coming to the house. March 2nd. I've moved everything here, below the house where they can't find it. If this goes wrong, if they freeze the accounts, everything we've built will be protected. March 21st. We're leaving tonight. I've arranged it all. The car, the route, the cover story. They'll think we died. It's the only way. When enough time passes, when the investigation dies, we'll come back. Everything will be here, waiting. The journal ended there. Marcus stood in the vault, surrounded by the accumulated wealth of a family that had tried to disappear, and felt the full weight of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a time capsule, a buried fortune, a secret that powerful people had killed to protect, or maybe died trying to protect. His flashlight flickered. Marcus looked around the vault one more time, at the gold and the bonds and the art and the endless files documenting deals that were probably illegal. He thought about the sheriff's words. People who've tried to claim this place before, they don't stay long. He thought about his daughters, asleep upstairs, innocent and trusting that Daddy knew what he was doing. And he thought about Claire, who had made him promise in those final days that he would take care of their girls no matter what, that he would give them a life worth living. Marcus closed the vault, walked back up the stone stairs, and shut the reinforced door behind him. He didn't lock it. Couldn't lock it now that he'd broken the mechanisms, but he pulled a heavy shelf in front of it, enough to hide it from casual view. Then he went upstairs, checked on Sophie and Lily, both still sleeping soundly, and sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He'd bought this house for $75,000, thinking it was either the worst mistake of his life or a desperate shot at salvation. Now he knew it was something else entirely. It was a secret worth $295 million, hidden by a family who'd vanished trying to protect it. And somehow, impossibly, it all belonged to him. Outside, the mountain wind picked up, rattling the old windows. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked. And Marcus Reed, exhausted and terrified and more alone than he'd ever been, made a decision. He wasn't leaving. Whatever came next, whatever consequences followed from breaking open that vault, he would face them. Because maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what Claire had been talking about. Something beautiful to build after she was gone. He just had to survive long enough to build it. The first week at Ashford Manor passed in a blur of dust and determination. Marcus woke before dawn each morning, the mountain cold seeping through the old windows, and worked until his hands bled. There was so much to do, broken shutters to repair, leaks to patch, decades of grime to scrub away. He worked with a kind of fevered intensity, as if staying busy would keep him from thinking too hard about what lay beneath his feet. Sophie and Lily adapted with the resilience of children who'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to them. They explored the grounds, discovering overgrown gardens and a stone fountain that hadn't run in 37 years. Lily found a rope swing hanging from an ancient oak tree, the rope frayed but still holding. Sophie discovered a greenhouse behind the main house, its glass panels mostly intact, filled with the skeletal remains of plants that had died decades ago. Marcus let them roam, but only during daylight. At night, he kept them close. The house still unsettled him, especially after dark. Sounds that had no source. Cold spots in rooms that should have been warm. The constant feeling of being watched. He told himself it was just an old house settling, exactly what he'd told Sophie. But he didn't quite believe it. On the fourth day, as Marcus was replacing rotted boards on the front porch, a beat-up Toyota Corolla came rattling up the drive. An older woman climbed out, maybe 70, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She carried a covered dish and approached with the cautious friendliness of someone who'd lived in small towns her whole life. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice warm. "I'm Helen Murphy. I live about 2 miles down the mountain. Thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans and accepted the dish. It was still warm. "That's really kind of you. I'm Marcus Reed." "I know," Helen said. "Whole town knows. You're the talk of Ridgemont, the man who actually moved into the Ashford place." "I'm getting the feeling that's not a good thing." Helen's smile faded slightly. "People around here have long memories. The Ashfords weren't well loved, put it that way. They made their money buying up land, sometimes through means that weren't entirely ethical. Forced sales, legal pressure, that sort of thing. Destroyed a lot of family businesses, a lot of legacies." Marcus set the dish down on the porch railing. "The sheriff mentioned they were under investigation." "Investigation is putting it mildly. The feds were building a case for fraud, embezzlement, racketeering. William Ashford and his partners, they'd been manipulating property values, bribing county officials, forging documents to push through deals. Millions of dollars, dozens of families affected." Helen paused. "Then they disappeared. Convenient timing." "You think they faked their deaths?" Helen shrugged. "I think powerful people don't die in convenient car accidents very often, but the bodies were identified, so who knows? What I do know is that house has been sitting here like a monument to their greed. People tried to claim it over the years, but none of them lasted. Why not? Some said the house was haunted. Others said it felt wrong, oppressive. One family made it 3 weeks before they left all their belongings and never came back." Helen looked at Marcus carefully. "You seem different, though. Determined." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Marcus said simply. "This is it for us, my daughters and me. We make it work here, or we're back in a 1-bedroom apartment barely scraping by." Understanding softened Helen's expression. "You lost someone. I can see it in your eyes. I lost my husband 8 years ago, so I recognize that particular kind of tired." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak about Claire. Helen touched his arm gently. "Well, you need anything at all, you call me. I mean that. These mountain winters are brutal, and you've got those babies to keep safe." She left him her number, scrawled on a piece of paper torn from a church bulletin. After she drove away, Marcus stood on the porch for a long time, holding that scrap of paper like a lifeline. One person in this town didn't want him gone. That was something. That night, after the girls were asleep, Marcus returned to the vault. He couldn't stay away. Every time he tried to focus on repairs or cleaning or being a normal father dealing with a normal fixer-upper, his mind drifted back to what waited below, the gold bars stacked like bricks, the stock certificates from companies that were probably worth 10 times what they'd been in 1987, the art wrapped in protective cloth. He'd done some research on his laptop, using the spotty internet connection he'd managed to get working. The paintings alone, if they were authentic, could be worth tens of millions. A Rothko, a de Kooning, a Basquiat from his early period. William Ashford had been collecting seriously. Marcus pulled out the journal again, reading more carefully this time. William's entries painted a picture of a man who'd started with legitimate business and slowly slipped into corruption. Small compromises at first. A bribe here, a forged signature there, then bigger moves, more brazen. He'd convinced himself it was all necessary, that he was building something for his family, for his daughter's futures. March 5th, 1987. I've been thinking about redemption lately. Margaret says I'm being maudlin, but I can't shake the feeling that we've done wrong. The money, the properties, the success, it's all built on taking from people who had less, on crushing small dreams so we could have bigger ones. I've set something aside, a foundation planned but never executed. If we'd had more time, if the investigation hadn't accelerated, I would have given it all back, found a way to help the families we hurt.
Marcus read that passage 3 times. A foundation. William Ashford, corrupt real estate mogul, had been planning some kind of redemption. The idea had never materialized because he'd run out of time, forced to flee before federal agents closed in. Marcus looked around the vault at the accumulated wealth of a man who'd died with regrets. His fingers traced the edge of a stock certificate worth, according to his research, approximately $4 million at current market value. There were dozens of them. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Marcus tensed, listening. Nothing. Just the house. Always just the house. He gathered several files, tucked them under his arm, and climbed back up the stone stairs. He needed to talk to someone who understood legal matters, someone who could tell him what he actually owned and what rights he had. The next morning, Marcus called Helen. She gave him the name of her nephew, David Murphy, a lawyer who practiced in Denver but grew up in Ridgemont. Marcus scheduled a call for that afternoon after he dropped the girls at the tiny local school they'd enrolled in. Sophie had been nervous, Lily excited. Both came home with stories about classmates and teachers who seemed nice enough. David Murphy had a calm, professional voice that reminded Marcus of Claire's oncologist, measured and careful. Marcus explained the situation, the auction, the house, the discovery of the vault. He sent photos of documents, descriptions of what he'd found. "Mr. Reed," David said after a long pause, "what you're describing is potentially the largest recovery of hidden assets in state history. If everything you found belonged to the Ashford estate and the estate was legally transferred to you through the auction, then yes, it's all yours." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "You're sure?" "I'd need to review the actual deed and the trust documents, but in general, when you purchase a property, you purchase everything attached to and within that property. The Ashfords abandoned the estate. It went into a trust, which failed to maintain it, leading to the foreclosure. You bought it legally." David's tone shifted, became more cautious. "However, there will be complications." "What kind of complications?" "Taxes, for one. Inheritance taxes, capital gains. The IRS will want their share. And if anyone connected to the original Ashford Estate Trust wants to contest your ownership, they could tie this up in court for years." David paused. "There's also the question of the original crimes. If the Ashfords acquired assets through illegal means, there could be claims from victims or their families." Marcus's head spun. "So what do I do?" "Document everything. Photograph every item, every document. Create a complete inventory. Then we file the appropriate paperwork with the state, declare the found assets, and prepare for a legal battle. David's voice softened. "Mr. Reed, this is going to get complicated and expensive. Are you prepared for that?"
Marcus looked around the kitchen of Ashford Manor, at the water-stained ceiling he'd been planning to repair, at Sophie's backpack hanging by the door. "I don't have a choice. This is my daughter's future we're talking about."
"Then let's do this right. I'll drive up this weekend to see the property myself. In the meantime, don't touch anything else in that vault. Don't move anything. Don't sell anything. We need to establish a clear chain of custody for legal purposes." After the call ended, Marcus sat at the kitchen table feeling the weight of what he'd gotten himself into. This wasn't just about fixing up an old house anymore. This was about navigating legal systems he didn't understand, fighting battles he didn't know how to fight. But the alternative was walking away from $295 million. Walking away from security for Sophie and Lily. Walking away from the first real chance they'd had since Claire died. He wouldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Over the next week, Marcus threw himself into cataloguing the vault. He took thousands of photos, created spreadsheets, organized files by date and type. Helen stopped by regularly, bringing food and company. She didn't ask too many questions about what he was doing, just provided steady, grandmotherly support that Marcus hadn't realized he desperately needed. Sophie noticed the change in him. "You seem happier, Daddy," she said one evening as they ate Helen's pot roast at the kitchen table. "Do I?" Marcus asked. "You smile more, like you used to, before Mama got sick." The observation hit Marcus like a punch. He'd been so focused on survival, on just getting through each day, that he hadn't noticed his own slow resurrection. This house, for all its darkness and secrets, was giving him something to work toward, something bigger than bills and grief. "I think maybe this place is good for us," he said carefully. "What do you think? Do you like it here?"
Lily answered immediately. "I love it. My teacher says we live in a castle."
Sophie was more measured, thoughtful. "It's scary sometimes, but it's also kind of magical, like we're the main characters in a story instead of just people things happen to."
Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We are the main characters, Soph. We always were."
That night changed everything. Marcus was down in the vault, photographing the last section of files, when he heard the floor creak above him. Not the normal settling sounds he'd grown accustomed to, but deliberate footsteps, multiple sets, moving through the house. His blood turned to ice. The girls were asleep upstairs. He grabbed his phone and crept up the stone stairs, killing his flashlight. The reinforced door stood open, the shelf he'd used to hide it pushed aside. Someone had found it. Someone was in his house. Marcus emerged into the back hallway and heard voices, low, male, coming from the front of the house. He moved silently toward the stairs, every instinct screaming to run to his daughters. He started up, keeping to the edges where the wood didn't creak. "There's nothing here," one voice said, frustrated. "Just old furniture and dust." "He found something," another voice replied. "Why else would he stay? Everyone else left. Maybe he's just broke and desperate. Or maybe he's smarter than we thought." Marcus reached the second floor. Sophie and Lily's doors were closed, undisturbed. He slipped into Sophie's room. She was awake, sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whispered, "there are men downstairs." "I know, baby. Stay quiet. I'm going to check on Lily. Then we're going to hide, okay?" Sophie nodded, trembling. Marcus moved to Lily's room. She was still asleep, somehow oblivious. He gently picked her up, and she stirred but didn't wake. With Lily in his arms and Sophie following close behind, Marcus led them to the master bedroom. There was a walk-in closet, deep and dark. He settled them in the back corner. "No matter what you hear," he whispered to Sophie, "you stay here with your sister. You don't come out until I come get you. Understand?" "What are you going to do?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking. "Protect you," Marcus said simply.
He closed the closet door and pulled out his phone, dialing 911 as he moved back downstairs. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. "There are intruders in my house," Marcus said quietly. "Ashford Manor on Ridgemont Mountain. I have 2 children here. I need police now." "Officers are on the way, sir. Stay on the line with me." But Marcus couldn't stay on the line. The voices had moved to the library. He crept toward it, staying in the shadows. Through the doorway, he could see 2 men, both dressed in dark clothes, going through William Ashford's books and papers. "This is private property," Marcus said loudly, stepping into the light. "You need to leave, now." Both men turned. One was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and expensive clothes. The other was younger, built like someone who worked security. Neither looked particularly surprised to see him. "Mr. Reed," the older man said calmly, "my name is Richard Pierce. I represent the Ashford Estate Trust. We need to talk." "Talk with the police. They'll be here in about 5 minutes." Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There's no need for that. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to make you an offer." What Marcus doesn't know is that someone has been watching the estate for decades, waiting for exactly this moment, and they'll do anything to claim what they believe is rightfully theirs. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. "An offer," Marcus repeated, his hand still gripping his phone. "You break into my house in the middle of the night to make me an offer." Richard had the grace to look slightly apologetic. "Admittedly, our approach was aggressive, but you haven't been answering calls or letters. We needed to get your attention." He gestured to the books around them. "You've discovered the vault, obviously, and you've begun to understand what you've actually purchased." "Which is my property," Marcus said, "bought legally at a public auction." "Legally, yes, but morally?" Richard's expression hardened. "The assets in that vault don't belong to you, Mr. Reed. They belong to the Ashford family, to the legacy William Ashford built." "William Ashford is dead. Has been for 37 years. The bloodline isn't." Richard pulled a folder from his jacket. "I'm William Ashford's son. Illegitimate, yes, but DNA verified. My mother was his secretary. He supported us quietly until his death, and he left provisions in his will acknowledging me as his heir." Marcus felt the floor shift under him. "If you're his heir, why didn't you claim the estate years ago?" "Because the trust was structured specifically to prevent that. William was paranoid about the investigation, about assets being seized. He created a labyrinth of legal protections, trusts within trusts, offshore holdings. It's taken me 30 years to unravel it." Richard stepped closer. "But what he couldn't protect against was abandonment. The property fell into foreclosure because I couldn't access the trust funds to pay the taxes. And you swooped in." "I didn't swoop anywhere. I bought a house I could barely afford because my family needed a home. And now you're sitting on a fortune you have no right to." Richard's voice remained calm, but steel underneath. "I'm prepared to make this simple. Sign over your rights to the estate. I'll pay you $200,000 for your trouble. That's more than fair compensation for a $75,000 investment." Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. $200,000 for assets worth hundreds of millions? You must think I'm stupid." "I think you're a grieving father who's in over his head. This isn't just about money, Mr. Reed. There are people, powerful people, who were damaged by William Ashford's business practices. People who will come looking for compensation the moment this becomes public. Lawyers, investigators, journalists, they'll tear your life apart." Richard's tone became almost gentle. "Take the money. Give your daughters a quiet, safe life somewhere else. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Sirens wailed in the distance, coming up the mountain. Richard heard them and sighed. "Think about my offer. You have 72 hours. He handed Marcus a business card. "After that, things get complicated."
Richard and his associate left through the front door, walking calmly to a black Mercedes parked behind Marcus's Civic. They drove away just as Sheriff Thomas's cruiser came screaming up the drive, lights flashing. Marcus stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear down the mountain. His hands were shaking. Thomas climbed out of his cruiser, one hand on his weapon. "You all right? Dispatch said you had intruders." "They're gone. 2 men, one claimed to be William Ashford's illegitimate son, said he represented the estate trust." Thomas's expression darkened. "Richard Pierce. Yeah, I know him. He's been lurking around Ridgemont for years, buying up properties, making trouble. If he was here, this situation just got a lot more dangerous. He offered me money to leave, $200,000. "And you said no, I'm guessing?" Marcus nodded. Thomas holstered his weapon and leaned against the cruiser. "Mr. Reed, Richard Pierce doesn't make offers out of kindness. If he's willing to pay you to leave, it means what you have is worth a hell of a lot more than $200,000. He paused. "It also means he'll escalate. Threats, legal pressure, maybe worse. You need to be prepared for that." "I don't know how to be prepared for that," Marcus admitted. "I'm just a guy trying to give his kids a decent life. I don't know anything about trust law or estate battles or any of this." "Then get a lawyer, a good one, and document everything. Every threat, every contact, every piece of evidence you can find." Thomas pulled out his own card. "And you keep me on speed dial, you hear?" After Thomas left, Marcus went upstairs and collected his daughters from the closet. Lily had fallen back asleep. Sophie was still wide awake, tears tracking down her face. "Are the bad men gone?" she asked. "Yes, baby, they're gone." "Are they coming back?" Marcus wanted to lie, to tell her everything would be fine, but Sophie deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as an 8-year-old could handle. "I don't know," he said, "but I promise you, I won't let anyone hurt you. You or Lily. That's my job, keeping you safe." They all slept in the master bedroom again that night, huddled together. Marcus didn't sleep at all. He lay awake, listening to the house, thinking about Richard's offer. $200,000. It was more money than he'd ever seen. Enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere safer. But it wasn't enough. Not compared to what lay beneath his feet. Not compared to the future that fortune could buy for Sophie and Lily. College educations, security, opportunities, everything Claire had wanted for them. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. He called David Murphy before the sun was fully up. "They came to my house last night," Marcus said, "broke in, threatened me." David was quiet for a moment. "Tell me everything." Marcus did. When he finished, David let out a long breath. "All right, this is what we're going to do. I'm coming up there today, not this weekend. We're going to inventory everything, file every piece of paperwork we need to establish your legal ownership beyond any doubt. Then we're going to go on offense." "Offense how?" "If Richard Pierce is William Ashford's illegitimate son, he may have a claim to personal items, family heirlooms, things like that. But the property and everything purchased with Ashford's business profits? That went through the trust, through foreclosure, to you. We make it airtight. We make it impossible for him to contest." "And if he doesn't back down?" "Then we prepare for a fight. And Mr. Reed, we make damn sure we win." David arrived that afternoon, a serious man in his 40s with his Aunt Helen's kind eyes and a leather briefcase full of legal documents. He spent 6 hours in the vault, photographing, documenting, cross-referencing files against public records. When he finally emerged, he looked stunned. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. "The stock certificates alone, if they're legitimate, are worth over $100 million at current market value. The art could be another 50 to 70 million. The golden bonds another 30, and there are property deeds here for land parcels I didn't even know existed." Marcus felt dizzy. "So it's real, all of it. It's real, and it's legally yours, assuming we can prove chain of custody and navigate the tax implications." David set his briefcase on the kitchen table.
But Marcus, you need to understand what you're up against. Richard Pierce has been planning this for decades. He's got resources, connections, probably lawyers on retainer. This is going to be brutal. I don't care, Marcus said. My wife died 18 months ago. I've already been through brutal. This is just a different kind. David studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right then, let's get to work. Over the next 2 days, they built their case. David filed notice of found assets with the county clerk, the state revenue department, and the IRS. He requested expedited review of the estate transfer. He drafted cease and desist letters to Richard Pierce, demanding no further contact. And he helped Marcus open a safety deposit box at a bank in Denver, where they stored copies of the most valuable documents. Helen kept the girls occupied, taking them on hikes and teaching them to bake cookies in her farmhouse kitchen. Sophie started calling her grandma Helen, and Lily followed suit. Marcus was grateful for the normalcy, for the way Helen provided something his daughters had lost when Claire died, a grandmother's gentle presence. On the third night after Richard's visit, Marcus was doing dishes when he heard glass break. He ran to the living room. A rock had come through the front window, wrapped in paper. He carefully unwrapped it. The message was short, typed, "You have 72 hours to vacate or face consequences." Marcus looked out the broken window into the darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, Richard Pierce and his people were watching, waiting. They thought they could scare him away, thought he was just another desperate person who'd give up when things got hard. They didn't know about Claire. Didn't know what it was like to sit beside someone you love and watch them fade, powerless to stop it. Didn't know the particular kind of strength that comes from surviving that. Marcus picked up his phone and called Sheriff Thomas. Reported the vandalism. Then he called David and told him what happened. "We're not backing down," Marcus said. "Whatever comes next, we face it." "Then brace yourself," David replied, "because Richard Pierce just declared war." Marcus hung up and walked through the house, checking locks, making sure his daughters were safe and asleep. He stopped at the window Sophie had discovered on her first day, the one that looked out over the mountains. The view was breathtaking, vast and wild and beautiful. Claire would have loved it here. She would have loved the challenge of restoring this broken place, of turning something dark into something good, and she would have told him, in that gentle but firm way she had, that running wasn't an option, not when their daughters' futures hung in the balance. "I'm not running," Marcus whispered to her memory. "I promise you, I'm not running." Outside, the mountain wind howled. Inside, Ashford Manor settled around him, no longer quite so threatening. It was just a house, just stone and wood and glass, and beneath it, a fortune that could change everything. Marcus just had to survive long enough to claim it. The morning after the rock through the window, Marcus woke to find his car's tires slashed. All 4 of them, clean cuts that left no doubt this was deliberate. He stood in the driveway, coffee growing cold in his hand, staring at the damage. Sheriff Thomas arrived within 20 minutes of the call, took photos, filed a report that both of them knew wouldn't lead anywhere. "They're escalating," Thomas said, walking the perimeter of the property, "trying to make you feel unsafe, vulnerable, classic intimidation tactics." "It's working," Marcus admitted. "I've got 2 little girls depending on me. How am I supposed to keep them safe when I can't even protect my own car?" Thomas stopped, turned to face him. "You know what I think? I think Richard Pierce is getting desperate. People don't resort to vandalism when they're confident in their legal position. They do it when they're scared." He paused. "Which means your lawyer is doing something right." David called an hour later with news. "I filed the preliminary ownership claim this morning. The state has 60 days to review, but based on the documentation we provided, I don't see how they can deny it. The property transfer was legal, the foreclosure was proper, and you've got clear chain of custody for everything in the vault. So what happens now?" "Now we wait for Richard to make his move.
And Marcus. When he does, it's going to be ugly. He can't win on the merits, so he'll try to win through pressure. Legal fees, public scrutiny, making your life hell until you give up. "I'm not giving up," Marcus said for what felt like the 100th time. "Good. Because I got a call this morning from a reporter at the Denver Post. Somehow they found out about the estate discovery. I didn't confirm anything, but the story's going to break soon. You need to be ready for that." Marcus wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready for their life to become public spectacle? But he spent the day preparing anyway, coaching Sophie and Lily on what to say if strangers asked questions, which was basically nothing. He called Helen and warned her. He replaced the broken window and patched the tire damage well enough to get the car to a shop. The article hit 3 days later. Front page of the Denver Post. Widowed father discovers $295 million fortune in foreclosed mansion. The reporter had done their homework, tracking down the Ashford family history, the federal investigation, the mysterious disappearance. And they'd found Marcus's story too. Architect turned construction worker, wife dead from cancer, 2 young daughters struggling to survive. The narrative practically wrote itself. Desperate father stumbles onto life-changing wealth, faces battle with legitimate heir. Marcus's phone started ringing before he'd finished reading the article. Reporters mostly. A few lawyers offering their services. One producer from a documentary company wanting to option his story. He ignored them all until one call came through from a number he recognized. "David." "Have you seen it?" David asked. "I'm reading it now." The reporter was surprisingly balanced. They presented both sides, mentioned Richard's claim without validating it. "But Marcus, this changes everything. You're about to become very famous, very fast." David was right. By that afternoon, news vans had started appearing on the road below the estate. By evening, there were 5 of them, cameras pointed at the house like it was under siege. Marcus closed all the curtains and kept the girls inside. Sophie handled it with her usual quiet intensity, but Lily was frightened by all the attention. "Why are they taking pictures of our house?" she asked, peeking through the curtains despite Marcus's instructions not to. "Because people are curious, baby. They want to know about the treasure we found." "But it's our treasure," Lily said, with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old. "We found it. It's ours." Marcus wished the legal system operated on 6-year-old logic. Life would be simpler. Helen came by that evening, bringing dinner and solidarity. She'd had to push through the reporters at the bottom of the drive, refusing to answer their questions with the kind of stern grandmother energy that made grown men back down. "This is madness," she said, setting a casserole on the counter. "They've been calling me too, asking about you, about the house. I told them to mind their own business." "I'm sorry you're getting dragged into this," Marcus said. "Don't you dare apologize. You're family now, and family protects each other." Helen pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "David called me, told me about Richard Pierce's threats. Marcus, is it true? Is he William Ashford's son?" "According to him, I haven't seen the DNA test, but David thinks it's probably legitimate. Then he might actually have a claim. To personal items maybe, family heirlooms, but not to the business assets, not to the property. That all went through legal channels that exclude him." Marcus rubbed his face. "At least that's what David says. I don't know anymore. I'm an architect, Helen. I fix buildings. I don't know anything about trust law or inheritance disputes." Helen reached across the table and took his hand. "You know about fighting for what matters. You know about protecting your children. That's enough." That night, after the girls were asleep and the reporters had finally left, Marcus returned to the vault. He'd been avoiding it since the break-in, but now he needed to understand. Needed to know who William Ashford really was and why he'd hidden all this. He pulled out more journals, reading through years of entries. William's voice emerged from the pages, complex and contradictory. A man who'd started with genuine ambition, who'd wanted to build something meaningful. But somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into greed. Deals became schemes. Partnerships became manipulations. Then Marcus found the entry that changed everything. Dated November 2nd, 1986. I've been thinking about redemption lately. Margaret says I'm being maudlin, but I can't shake the feeling that we've done wrong. The money, the properties, the success, it's all built on taking from people who had less. On crushing small dreams so we could have bigger ones. I met with attorneys today about setting up a foundation, the Ashford Family Foundation for Economic Recovery. We donate everything, create programs to help struggling families, provide small business loans, housing assistance, help the very people we've spent 20 years hurting. Margaret thinks I'm having a crisis of conscience. Maybe I am. But I look at our daughters and wonder what kind of world we're leaving them. What kind of legacy? I don't want them to inherit wealth built on other people's pain. I want them to inherit purpose. The plan is drafted. When this investigation blows over, when we're clear, we'll establish the foundation. Give it all away. Start clean. Marcus read that passage 3 times, his hands shaking. William Ashford had been planning to give it all back, to turn his ill-gotten fortune into something that helped people. The plan had died with him in that Wyoming car crash, buried along with his regrets. Marcus looked around the vault, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just hidden wealth. It was an unfinished promise, an act of redemption that never got the chance to happen. He thought about Claire, about the values she'd lived by. She'd dedicated her life to helping people, working as a social worker for families in crisis. She'd died with medical debt crushing them because she'd insisted on donating to charities, even when they could barely afford groceries. She'd believed, absolutely believed, that people with resources had a responsibility to those without. Sitting in that vault, surrounded by millions in assets, Marcus finally understood what he was supposed to do with it. The next morning, he called David. I want to establish the foundation. What foundation? The one William Ashford planned. I found his notes. He was going to donate everything to create programs for struggling families. We're going to do it for him. David was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, that's admirable, but let's secure your legal ownership first. Once that's settled, you can do whatever you want with the money. No, Marcus said firmly. We announce it now. We tell Richard Pierce and the media and everyone watching that this fortune isn't about me getting rich. It's about honoring William Ashford's original intent and using this money the way it should have been used 30 years ago. That's a huge decision. You'd be giving up billions. I'd be keeping enough for my family's security and giving away the rest. $200 million to the foundation. The rest for taxes, legal fees, and a trust for Sophie and Lily's futures. Marcus paused. Claire would have wanted this. She spent her whole life helping people. This is how I honor that. David sighed. All right, but we do this carefully, strategically. We get the tax benefits structured properly. We make sure the foundation is legally sound, and we use this to strengthen your case, not weaken it. They worked on the plan for 3 days. David brought in a specialist in non-profit law, a sharp woman named Teresa Chen, who helped them draft the foundation documents. The Ashford Clare Foundation, it would be called. Dedicated to affordable housing, medical debt relief, small business grants for working-class entrepreneurs, and scholarships for children who'd lost parents. Marcus involved the girls in planning it, asking them what they thought Mama would want the foundation to do. Sophie suggested grief counseling for kids. Lily wanted to make sure families had food. Their input shaped the mission statement in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. On a cold November morning, with reporters gathered on the front lawn of Ashford Manor, Marcus stepped onto the porch to make an announcement. David stood beside him, along with Helen and Teresa. Sophie and Lily watched from the window, Helen's sister staying inside with them.
Marcus had written a speech, but looking out at the cameras and microphones, he folded the paper and spoke from his heart instead. My name is Marcus Reed. 18 months ago, my wife Claire died of cancer. She left behind me and our 2 daughters and a mountain of medical debt. We were broke, grieving, barely surviving. When I bought this house at auction, I thought I was buying a chance at a fresh start. What I found was a fortune that could change our lives forever. He paused, steadying himself. I also found something else. Journals written by William Ashford, the original owner of this estate. Journals that showed a man who'd built his wealth through questionable means, but who had planned before his death to give it all away, to create a foundation that would help the very people his business practices had hurt. The reporters were silent now, listening. That foundation never happened because William Ashford died before he could establish it. But I'm going to finish what he started. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Ashford-Clare Foundation. $200 million will be dedicated to helping struggling families, providing housing assistance, relieving medical debt, supporting small businesses, and offering scholarships to children who've lost parents. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked rapidly. This money was never really mine. It's a responsibility, a chance to do something good with wealth that was accumulated through pain. My wife believed in helping people. William Ashford came to believe in it too at the end. This foundation is for both of them and for everyone who needs a second chance. He stepped back from the microphone. The questions started immediately, reporters shouting over each other, but David handled them while Marcus went back inside. His hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through him. He'd just publicly committed to giving away a fortune. There was no taking it back now. Sophie and Lily ran to him, and he scooped them both up despite his aching back. "Did you tell them about Mama?" Sophie asked. "I did, baby. I told them she'd be proud of what we're doing." "She would be," Sophie said with absolute certainty. "Mama always said money doesn't matter as much as people do." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. By that afternoon, the story had gone viral. Social media exploded with support. People shared their own stories of medical debt, of struggling after losing a spouse, of needing help and not finding it. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with messages from strangers thanking him, blessing him, telling him he was doing the right thing. But not everyone was pleased. Richard Pierce called that evening. Marcus almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him. "That was quite a performance today," Richard said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Turning yourself into a folk hero. Very clever." "It's not a performance. I meant every word. You're giving away money that doesn't belong to you. That's my father's legacy you're spending on your public relations campaign. Your father wanted to create this foundation. I found his plans. I'm just executing them." "My father was a complicated man who wrote many things in his journals. That doesn't make them legally binding." Richard's tone shifted, became almost pleading. "Marcus, you're making a mistake. The legal fees alone will drain whatever you're keeping. The IRS will tear you apart. And when the dust settles, you'll have nothing." "I'll have done the right thing. That's more than nothing." "The right thing," Richard laughed bitterly. "You want to do the right thing. Take my revised offer. $20 million, cash, and I'll drop all legal challenges. You can fund your little charity and still have plenty left over. $20 million. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking about what that money could do. Sophie's college fund, Lily's medical insurance for life, a real house in a safe neighborhood, financial security forever. But then he heard Sophie's voice from earlier. "Mama always said money doesn't matter as much as people do." "No," Marcus said. "The answer is no." Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. "Then you've made your choice. I'll see you in court." The line went dead. David had warned him it would come to this.
Richard filed the lawsuit 3 days later. Ashford Family Trust versus Marcus Reed, claiming that Marcus had no right to the assets in the vault, that they constituted a separate entity from the property itself, that as William Ashford's biological son, Richard had the rightful claim. The legal battle began in earnest. Depositions, motions, counter-motions. David brought in a team of lawyers, all working for a percentage of whatever Marcus kept after the foundation was established. They were confident, but the process was brutal. Marcus spent hours each week in David's office, reviewing documents, giving testimony, preparing for trial. Meanwhile, Richard's team fought dirty. They subpoenaed Marcus's financial records, suggesting he'd somehow known about the vault before the auction. They questioned his fitness as a parent, implying he was exploiting his daughters for sympathy. They dug into Claire's medical history, looking for anything they could use. The stress was crushing. Marcus started losing weight, sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, snapping at the girls over small things, and then hating himself for it. The reporters never really left. The pressure was constant. One night in early December, after a particularly brutal deposition where Richard's lawyers had spent 4 hours questioning every decision Marcus had made since Claire's diagnosis, he sat alone in the library of Ashford Manor and broke. He'd held it together for so long. Through Claire's illness, her death, the struggle to survive, the discovery of the vault, the battle with Richard. But sitting there in the dark, with his daughters asleep upstairs, and the weight of it all crushing down, Marcus finally let himself fall apart. He cried for the first time since Claire's funeral, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. He cried for everything he'd lost and everything he was risking. He cried because he was so tired of being strong, of making impossible decisions, of pretending he knew what he was doing. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered to the empty room, to Claire's memory. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." He waited for an answer that wouldn't come. Claire was gone. He was alone. And tomorrow he'd have to wake up and keep fighting because giving up wasn't an option, not with Sophie and Lily counting on him. But tonight, in the darkness of this house he'd bought for $75,000, Marcus let himself be broken. Sometimes that was all you could do. Break completely, fall apart, and trust that somehow you'd find the strength to put yourself back together before morning. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season. It covered the mountains in white, soft and quiet and clean. Inside, Marcus Reed sat in the library where William Ashford had once planned his empire, and he grieved. For Claire, for himself, for the normal life his daughters would never have. But when morning came, he got up. He made breakfast. He helped Sophie with her homework and braided Lily's hair. He called David to discuss their trial strategy. He kept moving forward because that's what you did. You survived one day at a time, one decision at a time. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and fear, Marcus found something he didn't expect. Determination. Not just to win the legal battle, but to prove that broken people could still do extraordinary things. That grief didn't have to be the end of the story. That maybe, just maybe, the treasure he'd found wasn't gold or stocks or art. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe it was the chance to turn pain into something beautiful. Maybe it was the knowledge that Claire's values, her belief in helping others, could live on through him. The fight wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But Marcus wasn't alone. He had David and Helen, Sophie and Lily, and an entire community of people who'd been touched by his story. People who believed in second chances, in redemption, in the power of choosing kindness even when it cost everything. He looked at William Ashford's journals on the desk and made a silent promise. To William, to Claire, to himself. He'd see this through. He'd create the foundation. He'd help people who needed it, and he'd teach his daughters that wealth meant nothing if you didn't use it to make the world better. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing Ashford Manor in silence, and for the first time since this all began, Marcus felt something close to peace. The trial was set for February. David spent the weeks leading up to it building their case, interviewing witnesses, compiling evidence. But it was a phone call in early January that changed everything. Emma Castellano was an investigative journalist for the Colorado Independent, known for deep-dive reporting that had exposed corruption in state government and corporate fraud. She'd been following Marcus's story from the beginning, and unlike the other reporters who wanted sound bites and drama, she wanted the truth. "Mr. Reed," she said when Marcus finally agreed to meet with her, "I've been digging into Richard Pierce's background. There's a story here that goes way beyond inheritance disputes." They met at a diner in Denver, away from the cameras and attention. Emma spread documents across the table between them, a paper trail that told a damning story. "Richard Pierce has been managing the Ashford Estate Trust for 32 years, Emma explained. "In that time, he's authorized payments to himself totaling over $8 million, consulting fees, management fees, legal fees, all perfectly legal on paper. But here's the interesting part." She pulled out a spreadsheet. "The trust was supposed to maintain the property, pay taxes, preserve the assets. But if you look at the actual expenditures, almost nothing went to the estate. The taxes went unpaid, leading to foreclosure. The house fell into disrepair. So where did the money go?" Marcus studied the numbers. "He was embezzling." "That's what I think. He's been bleeding the trust dry for decades, taking money that should have gone to property maintenance. And when the foreclosure happened, he couldn't stop it because he'd already spent the funds that should have covered the taxes." Emma leaned forward. "Marcus, Richard Pierce isn't fighting you because he's William Ashford's son. He's fighting you because you're about to expose 30 years of fraud." "Can you prove this?" "I've got sources at the law firm that manage the trust. They're willing to talk, off the record for now, and I've got bank records showing suspicious transfers, but I need more time to build the story." She paused. "The question is, are you willing to go on record, tell your side fully? Because once this article publishes, there's no going back." Marcus thought about Sophie and Lily, about the quiet life he'd wanted to build for them. Going public would mean more attention, more scrutiny, more cameras, but it would also mean the truth coming out. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Emma smiled. "Everything. I want to know about Claire, about how you ended up here, about what you found in that vault. I want William Ashford's journals, the foundation plans, all of it. I want to write the definitive story of how a widowed father discovered a fortune and chose to give it away." They spent 3 days together. Emma came to Ashford Manor, interviewed Marcus for hours, met Sophie and Lily, talked to Helen and David. She photographed the vault, the journals, the documents. She was thorough and respectful, and Marcus found himself trusting her in a way he hadn't trusted any other journalist. The article published on January 23rd. It was 15,000 words long, spread across multiple pages of the Colorado Independent's website. The headline read, "The Widower and the Fortune, How Marcus Reed Exposed Decades of Corruption While Honoring His Late Wife's Legacy." Emma had done exactly what she promised. She'd told the whole story, from Claire's death to the auction to the discovery of the vault. But more than that, she'd investigated Richard Pierce with the same thoroughness she'd brought to Marcus's story. The article detailed the embezzlement, the suspicious payments, the deliberate neglect of the estate. It included testimony from former trust employees, bank records, email exchanges. And it revealed something Marcus hadn't known. Richard Pierce had been forging documents for years, creating fake maintenance records to justify his payments, falsifying tax filings to hide his theft. The reaction was explosive. Within hours, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. By that evening, the Colorado Attorney General's office announced an investigation into the Ashford Estate Trust. By the next morning, federal investigators had joined them. Richard Pierce's lawyers immediately filed for a continuance of the trial, claiming they needed time to respond to the allegations.
But David pushed back hard, arguing that the criminal investigation only strengthened Marcus's position. The judge agreed. The trial would proceed as scheduled. Marcus watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. He'd spent months feeling like he was fighting alone against an enemy he didn't understand. Now, suddenly, the full weight of law enforcement was on his side. Reporters who'd been neutral were now openly supportive. Public opinion had shifted decisively in his favor. But he couldn't celebrate. Not yet. The trial was still coming, and Richard Pierce, desperate and cornered, was more dangerous than ever. The threats escalated. Someone spray-painted fraud across the front of Ashford Manor. Marcus's car was vandalized again. Anonymous letters arrived, some threatening, others pleading with him to drop the foundation plan and just take the money. Sheriff Thomas increased patrols around the property. David hired private security. Helen insisted the girls stay with her most nights, giving Marcus space to deal with the legal battle without worrying about their safety every second. And then, a week before the trial, something happened that Marcus didn't expect. People started showing up at Ashford Manor, not reporters or lawyers or threats, just people, families who'd read Emma's article and wanted to help. They brought tools, supplies, their time. A retired contractor offered to repair the roof. A group of women from Ridgemont came to clean. Teenagers volunteered to clear the overgrown gardens. "We saw what you're trying to do," one man said, a truck driver named Frank who'd lost his wife to the same cancer that took Claire. "Building something good out of grief, that matters. We want to be part of it." Within days, Ashford Manor was transformed. The crew working on it grew to 30, then 50 people. They repaired windows, patched walls, refinished floors. They worked in shifts, bringing food and laughter and a sense of community Marcus hadn't felt since before Claire died. Sophie and Lily were enchanted by it all. They helped where they could, bringing water to workers, sweeping floors, painting walls under careful supervision. Lily declared she was the assistant project manager. Sophie started documenting everything in a journal, writing about the people who came and the stories they shared. Helen coordinated it all with the efficiency of someone who'd been organizing church potlucks for 50 years. She kept lists, managed schedules, made sure everyone felt welcome. The mansion, which had felt so haunted and oppressive when Marcus first arrived, now echoed with voices and purpose. "This is what it should have been all along," Helen said one evening as they watched the sunset from the restored front porch. "William Ashford built this place for his ego. You're turning it into something that serves people. That's redemption." The trial began on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Marcus thought about the bitter irony of spending a day meant for love in a courtroom fighting over money. Claire had never cared about Valentine's Day, said it was a corporate holiday, but she'd always left him little notes. He'd found one in his coat pocket that morning. Must have been there since before she died. "You're stronger than you know. I love you forever." He carried it with him into the courtroom like a talisman. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Richard's lawyers argued that the vault and its contents constituted a separate trust, that Marcus had no legal right to assets William Ashford had deliberately hidden, that as the biological son, Richard was the rightful heir to his father's estate. David and his team countered with overwhelming evidence. The property transfer was legal. The foreclosure was proper. Everything within the property, including the vault, transferred to the new owner. And Richard's claim as heir was undermined by his decades of embezzlement and fraud. They called witnesses. Former employees of the Ashford Estate Trust who testified about Richard's mismanagement. Forensic accountants who'd traced the missing millions. And Marcus himself, who spent 2 days on the stand explaining how he'd found the vault, what he'd discovered, and why he'd chosen to create the foundation. Richard's lawyers tried to paint him as an opportunist, someone exploiting his wife's death for sympathy. David objected repeatedly, and the judge sustained most of them. But the accusations still stung.
Marcus sat there, composed on the surface, falling apart inside, as strangers questioned his motives and his love for Claire.
Sophie attended one day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with Helen. She was too young to fully understand the legal arguments, but she understood her father was fighting for something important. When Marcus looked back and saw her there watching him with those serious green eyes, he found the strength to keep going. The prosecution's case in the parallel criminal investigation helped tremendously. They'd uncovered evidence that Richard had been planning to reclaim the estate for years, waiting for the right moment. He deliberately let the taxes lapse, knowing it would trigger foreclosure. His plan had been to buy the property himself at auction, but he hadn't expected competition, hadn't expected Marcus. When Marcus won the bid, Richard had panicked. All his years of embezzlement, all his careful planning, threatened by one desperate father with $75,000. On March 8th, the jury delivered their verdict. In the matter of the property and all assets contained within, including the vault and its contents, they found in favor of Marcus Reed. Richard Pierce's claim was denied. Marcus sat perfectly still as the verdict was read, hardly breathing. David gripped his shoulder. In the gallery, Helen and Sophie were crying. Richard stood rigid, his face white with fury and shock. But the judge wasn't done. She addressed Richard directly. "Mr. Pierce, your conduct throughout this trial has been reprehensible. The evidence of fraud and embezzlement presented here will be forwarded to the criminal proceedings. I suspect you'll be facing far more serious consequences than this civil judgment." She was right. Richard Pierce was arrested the next day on charges of embezzlement, fraud, falsifying documents, and conspiracy. The bail was set at $2 million, which he couldn't make. He'd spent everything he'd stolen, and no one was willing to help him. Marcus watched the news coverage of Richard's arrest with mixed feelings. Relief, yes. Vindication. But also something like pity. Richard had spent 32 years obsessed with claiming his father's fortune, and that obsession had destroyed him. He could have just asked for help, Marcus said to David that night. If he'd come to me honestly, told me he was William's son, we could have worked something out. Some of the personal items, family photos, things with sentimental value. But he was so focused on the money, he lost sight of everything else. Some people can't see past their own greed, David replied. Richard convinced himself he deserved that fortune because of who his father was. He never stopped to think about what his father would have actually wanted. With the trial over and his ownership secured, Marcus could finally move forward with the foundation. Teresa Chen had already completed most of the legal structure. Now it was just a matter of funding it and making it operational. The process took another 3 months. Appraisers valued every item in the vault. The stock certificates were sold, generating $112 million. The art went to auction, bringing in another $68 million. The gold and bonds added $31 million. The property deeds were sold to conservation groups and developers who committed to responsible use, generating $42 million more. In total, the estate's assets were valued at $293 million after taxes and legal fees. Marcus kept $60 million in a trust for Sophie and Lily's futures and his own security. The remaining $233 million went to the Ashford Clare Foundation. It was more than he'd planned, more than he'd dreamed, and it was terrifying. This wasn't just about giving money away. It was about building an organization that would last, that would actually help people, that would honor Claire's memory in a way that mattered. He assembled a board of directors, David as legal counsel, Teresa as executive director, Helen as community liaison, and several other people who'd been touched by the story and wanted to help. Emma Castellano joined as communications director, ensuring the foundation's work would be transparent and well documented. The mansion itself underwent a complete transformation. The main floor became office space for the foundation staff. The second floor housed meeting rooms and a resource center where families could come for help. The third floor remained private, converted into a comfortable apartment where Marcus and the girls could live. The vault, that underground chamber that had held so many secrets, was transformed into an archive. William Ashford's journals were preserved there, along with documents chronicling the Foundation's work. It became a place of remembrance and learning, no longer hiding shame, but celebrating redemption. The Foundation officially launched on October 1st, 1 year to the day after Marcus had won the auction. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew hundreds of people, local families, reporters, politicians, and strangers who'd followed the story from the beginning. Marcus stood at the podium on the front steps of Ashford Manor, Sophie and Lily on either side of him, and looked out at the crowd. A year ago he'd been broke and desperate, grieving and lost. Now he was standing at the center of something that could change lives. "This foundation exists because of two people," he began, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Claire Reed, my wife, who believed every person deserved dignity and support, and William Ashford, who spent his life taking from others but dreamed at the end of giving back." He paused, gathering himself. Grief is a strange thing. It can destroy you or it can transform you. For a long time after Claire died, I thought it would destroy me. I couldn't see past the pain, couldn't imagine a future that felt like anything but survival. Sophie squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. "But Claire taught me that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something new, something purposeful. This foundation is that new beginning. Every family we help, every medical bill we relieve, every small business we support, that's Claire's legacy continuing. That's her belief in people's goodness living on." He looked down at his daughters. "And it's the legacy I'm building for Sophie and Lily. I want them to grow up knowing that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to make the world better. That their mother's life mattered not because of how long she lived, but because of how deeply she loved." When he finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. But what Marcus remembered most was Lily tugging on his sleeve and saying, "Mama would be really proud, Daddy. I can feel it." The Foundation's work began immediately. They partnered with hospitals to create a medical debt relief program, paying off bills for families who'd been crushed by healthcare costs the way Marcus and Claire had been. In the first 6 months, they relieved over $12 million in debt for 300 families. They launched an affordable housing initiative, working with local developers to create quality homes for working-class families. The first development broke ground in Ridgemont itself, transforming an abandoned mill into 24 family units. The Small Business Grant Program provided seed money for entrepreneurs who couldn't get traditional loans. A single mother starting a bakery, a veteran opening a landscaping company, a teacher launching an after-school tutoring service. Each grant came with mentorship and support, not just money. And the scholarship program, Claire's Angels, provided full college funding for children who'd lost a parent. The first year they supported 18 students. Sophie helped review applications, reading essays from kids who understood what it meant to lose someone they loved. But the project closest to Marcus's heart was the Grief Center. He'd been planning it since that night he'd broken down in the library, since he'd realized how desperately people needed support when they were falling apart. The Claire Ashford Memorial House opened the following spring. It was a separate building on the estate grounds, designed specifically for grief counseling and support groups. Therapists donated time. Volunteers who'd survived their own losses led groups. Families could come for free, stay as long as they needed, find community in their pain. Marcus brought Sophie and Lily to the opening. They cut the ribbon together. 3 people who understood that grief never really ended, but you could learn to carry it differently. "This is where sad people come to feel better?" Lily asked, looking up at the building. "This is where hurting people come to remember they're not alone," Marcus corrected gently. "That's what helped Daddy the most, knowing other people understood." Sophie, now 9 years old and wise beyond her years, said something that nearly broke him. Mama's not really gone, is she? She's in all of this, in every person we help.
Marcus pulled both girls close. That's exactly right, Soph. She's in every bit of it. The transformation of Ridgemont itself was remarkable. The Foundation's presence brought jobs, resources, and hope to a town that had been slowly dying. Local businesses thrived again. Young families started moving in, attracted by the affordable housing and community support. The school expanded. The main street, which had been lined with empty storefronts, filled with new shops and restaurants. Helen watched it all with the satisfaction of someone who'd lived through the town's decline and now witnessed its rebirth. William Ashford nearly destroyed this place with his greed, she said one day. You brought it back to life with his money. That's the definition of redemption. Marcus had become something he never expected, a leader. People sought his advice, his support, his presence. It was overwhelming at times, but he'd learned to lean on his team, to trust others with responsibilities he couldn't carry alone. And slowly, carefully, he'd learned to live again. Not just survive, but actually live. He laughed more, slept better, stopped seeing every moment as something to endure and started seeing possibilities. He'd even started dating, though that felt complicated and strange. A teacher at Sophie's school, Anna, who'd lost her husband to a heart attack 3 years earlier. They understood each other's grief, didn't expect either of them to be healed or whole, just two broken people learning to be people again. Sophie approved. Lily declared she needed a new mom and made her opinions loudly known at every opportunity, which mortified Marcus and delighted Anna. But mostly, life was about the girls. Watching Sophie discover a love of writing, documenting the Foundation's work in journals that were thoughtful and beautiful. Watching Lily's fearless enthusiasm for everything, her absolute certainty that the world was good and people were kind. They'd moved through grief together, not past it, but through it, learning to carry Claire's memory not as a weight, but as a gift. She was in Sophie's green eyes, in Lily's wild laugh, in every decision Marcus made about the Foundation. 2 years after the trial, on a quiet Sunday morning, Marcus stood in the doorway of the Claire Ashford Memorial House and watched a support group meeting. 12 people sat in a circle, sharing their stories of loss. Some were crying, others were laughing through tears. All of them were finding what he'd found: community in pain, strength in vulnerability, hope in honesty. One woman, recently widowed with 3 kids, was talking about the medical bills she couldn't pay. Marcus made a note to have the Foundation reach out to her. Another man, who'd lost his son, was describing the scholarship he'd discovered that would allow his daughter to go to college. One of Claire's Angel scholarships. He didn't know Marcus was the one who'd created it, and Marcus didn't tell him. That wasn't the point. The point was that broken things could become beautiful, that grief could transform into grace, that one person's choice to do good could ripple out in ways impossible to measure. David found him there, standing in the doorway. Emma's article just went live, he said, the 2-year follow-up piece. Marcus had sat for another long interview with Emma, reflecting on everything that had happened since the trial. She'd titled it, What Money Can't Buy: How the Ashford Clare Foundation is Redefining Wealth. It's good, David continued. Really good. She talks about the families helped, the town's recovery, the grief center, but mostly she talks about you, about how you chose purpose over profit. I didn't choose anything special, Marcus said. I just tried to do what Claire would have done. That's what makes it special, David replied. That evening, Marcus sat on the front porch of Ashford Manor with Sophie and Lily, watching the sun set over the mountains. The house that had once felt so dark and oppressive now felt like home, filled with light and purpose and the constant flow of people coming for help, leaving with hope. Daddy, Sophie said, breaking the comfortable silence. At school, they want me to write about what I want to be when I grow up. What did you write? Marcus asked. I said I want to run the foundation, like you, Help people who are sad or scared or don't have enough money." She paused. "Is that okay?"
Marcus felt his throat tighten. "It's more than okay, baby, it's perfect." "I want to help too," Lily chimed in. "But I also want to be a princess." Sophie rolled her eyes. "You can't be a princess, that's not a real job." "Is too. Princesses help people. Daddy helps people. So I can be a helping princess." Marcus laughed, pulling both girls close. "You can be anything you want, both of you. That's what all of this is for, making sure you have choices, opportunities, a future." "We already have a future," Sophie said with her usual seriousness. "We have this place, this family, this work. Mama gave it to us, even though she's not here." And there it was. The truth Marcus had been learning over 2 years of grief and growth and grace. Claire hadn't left them with nothing. She'd left them with love, with values, with a foundation that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you chose to live. The fortune he'd found beneath Ashford Manor was real, worth hundreds of millions, but the treasure that actually mattered was sitting on either side of him. 2 daughters who'd survived loss and come out stronger. 2 girls who understood that wealth meant nothing if you hoarded it, everything if you shared it. Marcus looked out at the mountains, painted gold and purple by the setting sun. He thought about William Ashford, who'd built an empire on greed and died trying to make it right. He thought about Claire, who'd lived with nothing but gave everything. And he thought about himself, a widowed father who'd bought a crumbling mansion for $75,000 and found a reason to believe in tomorrow.
"I love you both," he said quietly. "More than any fortune, more than any house, more than anything in this world."
"We know," Lily said simply. "That's why you give the money away, because you love people more than money." Children had a way of distilling complex truths into simple wisdom. Marcus kissed the top of her head and held his daughters as darkness fell over the estate, over the town, over the mountains. Somewhere in that darkness, people were struggling, hurting, wondering how they'd survive, and somewhere in this house, now filled with light and purpose, a team was working to help them. Because one man had chosen to honor his wife's memory not with monuments or wealth, but with action, with compassion, with the simple revolutionary act of putting people before profit. The story of Marcus Reed and the Ashford fortune would be told for years to come. Articles and books and eventually a documentary. But the real story wasn't about discovering wealth. It was about discovering purpose, about turning grief into grace, about proving that broken people could build beautiful things if they were brave enough to try. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Marcus made a silent promise to Claire, to William, to himself. He'd keep going, keep building, keep helping, because some inheritances weren't measured in dollars. Some were measured in lives changed, families saved, hope restored. And that, he'd learned, was the only fortune worth having. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to choose compassion over greed, because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what we find, but what we choose to give away. As morning light touched the stone walls of Ashford Manor, Marcus Reed didn't reach for his toolbox to fix broken boards. He reached for the foundation's project files, not to build wealth, but to build futures for families who'd been forgotten, overlooked, and left behind. The mechanic-turned-architect-turned-father had become something else entirely, a guardian of second chances, a builder of hope, and living proof that the measure of a man isn't the fortune he discovers, but the legacy he creates with it. Because for Marcus, for Sophie and Lily, and for every family that would walk through those doors seeking help, money was never the treasure. Love was. Purpose was. And the courage to believe that from the ashes of grief, something beautiful could grow. That was the real fortune. And it was priceless. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe second chances can change everything.